Good afternoon. Welcome to Radio Row at Super Bowl 58, live from the Mandalay Bay Convention Center. I'm Roy Kessel, along with Kayla Bradham on behalf of Sports Philanthropy Network, and we're very excited today to have with us Darren Sudman. Darren is the founder of Simon's Heart and currently involved with the Walter Payton Alliance, so we're excited to have you with us and learn more about both of those programs. Darren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Roy and Kayla. Great to be here with you and to finally see what you guys do when you show up at the Super Bowl for an entire week. It's pretty insane here.
Well, it is hectic, and we're fortunate to have the opportunity to talk to amazing people, athletes that are impacting and changing their communities, people such as yourselves that have really taken advantage of a difficult situation and reached out to benefit so many people for the world. So take us back a little bit. I know it's a painful situation, but when you go back and talk about the reasons that you started Simon's Heart.
Sure. It was 19 years ago, actually. 2 weeks ago was the 19th anniversary of Simon's death. He was 3 months old, taking a nap, and he didn't wake up. Our pediatricians were wiser than most. They told us to go get our hearts checked because babies just don't die. And as a result of that, my wife, Phyllis, was diagnosed with a heart condition, an arrhythmia, that we found out was linked to up to 15% of all SIDS deaths, sudden infant death syndrome, and one of a handful of conditions that can cause students, particularly student athletes, to collapse and die. So we started Simon's Fund, which is now Simon's Heart, and set out to provide free heart screenings for students in and around the Philadelphia area.
So when you use that, you talked about the fact that did the heart screenings, right? And it's amazing with the technology that exists today, right? And all of the things that are tested at a child's birth, right? That this isn't one of them. You talk about that process. You've been involved in setting up screening and outreach programs throughout the Philadelphia area and beyond, and looking at changing legislation. Talk a little bit about that process in terms of doing the test. Why is this something that isn't just standard for every child?
So I don't think it's standard for a few reasons. One, there aren't enough pediatric cardiologists to look at an EKG exam. Two, there hasn't been enough research yet done to know what a normal child's EKG should look like. ECG and EKG are the same things. I just use them interchangeably. And so what can happen is that if a high school student went into a physician's office and that EKG was examined by a cardiologist, that cardiologist might flag something because it doesn't look normal like all the other EKGs he or she has seen from his or her 50-year-old patient. And then you clog up the system, you cost the system a lot more money. And so there's not a lot of innovation being done at the pediatric level. There's not a lot of research being done at the pediatric level. And I think as a result of that, our kids are suffering. So sometimes it takes giants like the NFL to get behind causes. That's what we saw happen with concussion safety. And that's now what we're seeing happen with Damar Hamlin and the heart. Now, I want to be clear that, Damar Hamlin and the NFL don't seem to be advocating for heart screenings, but they are advocating very hard to get AED devices in schools where kids play, and also make sure that everybody knows how to do chest compressions, hands-on CPR.
We talked with one of our interviews earlier about Damar Hamlin's situation, and you think about as bad as it was, had he been almost anywhere else in the world other than the middle of an NFL stadium, he probably wouldn't have survived. You look around this room and you look at the chaos that's right here, and if something happened in this aisle, right, the amount of time it would take people to get there would be
Yep.
substantially.
Absolutely. There's research that shows that for people who suffer cardiac arrest outside of a hospital, the chances of survival are under 20%. And that's because there's only two things that can save that person: an AED device to shock the heart, and chest compressions to keep the blood flowing throughout the body. Most people don't have access to an AED, and they're apprehensive to do anything to someone who's in distress because they don't want to hurt a person. They don't necessarily realize that that person's already dead. So there's really not much of a balancing test you need to do before jumping in to perform CPR.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about the need to do both of those things, and um, you've been involved in some legislation that you've lobbied for through Simon's Heart or outside of Simon's Heart to get change. Talk about what that involved.
Yeah, so I mentioned before the NFL and the concussion safety legislation that they were able to help push through in all 50 states. And I'm not shy to admit that when I heard that story on NPR in 2011, I Googled the Lystedt family who was behind that. Zachary Lystedt is the young man who was paralyzed from second impact syndrome. And I looked at the legislation they offered, and I took that as a template and changed a noun from head to heart, changed a couple verbs and adjectives, and took a law called the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Prevention Act to Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, and was fortunate enough to get Mike Vereb, who was a representative at the time, to be a champion. And in 14 months, we got that passed. And since then, 15 other states have adopted a version of the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Prevention Act. And now Simon's Heart is part of the Healthy Heart Coalition that is trying to get AED devices into schools, make sure that schools have emergency action plans, and also that people who are responsible for the students know how to do hands-only CPR.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is looking at the whole process in terms of what's going on, right? Getting these laws changed. It's not an easy process. You talked about getting this started. Talk a little bit about how hard that is and really how many steps go into that and how long it takes.
I I don't think it's hard if you have a compelling story. It's very involved. There's lots of work, lots of footsteps, a lot of door knocking, a lot of phone calls, a lot of follow up, a lot of organization. But if you can tell a story about why your experience can help prevent other tragedies, like the Lystedt family did, like my family did, there's usually someone who's going to listen to it, because at the end of the day, the people we elect are fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, and they have the same experience as we do. So if I talk to a lawmaker about my child who passed away or my child who plays sports, oftentimes there's a connection. Like I said, it's not something that's particularly difficult. It's just very taxing.
So you've now transitioned away from Simon's Heart. I'm sure that was a difficult decision in so many respects. And one of the new things you're involved in is this Walter Payton Alliance. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and the goal of the alliance.
Sure. I left the role of executive director of Simon's Heart 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago now, and then started consulting for companies and nonprofits on how to create impact. And fortunately, I'm now working with a company called Zuzu and the Payton family to create the Walter Payton Alliance, which has three prongs. The first prong is to convene the men of the year throughout the year. These men are accomplishing amazing things, making huge impact in our communities, and we think that that can be increased exponentially if they start collaborating. The second prong is using our curriculum to educate young athletes, young professional athletes, about what it means to engage with the community, how they can be effective, uh, how they can be authentic, how they can choose causes that mean something to them, so that they don't inadvertently start a foundation and then realize, oh my God, there's so much to do here. Or I didn't realize I had to pay attention to this, and now people are asking me difficult questions. There are lots of ways that athletes can leverage their platform and their passions to give back. And we just want them to go in eyes wide open. And then the third thing is celebrating student athletes who are not only great in their sport, but making an impact in their community. Those will be called Peyton Fellows. And so we're excited that over the next 12 months to put these three things into action.
Well, you talked so many important issues there, right? We see everyday athletes that care about their communities and want to make an impact, but that is very different from, let's say, taking the reins and setting up an entire foundation and creating programs and everything. And we chuckle because too frequently, in our view, agents or advisors will set up the shell of a foundation for an athlete and go, there, we did all the hard work for you. Now all you have to do is raise money and run programs. And and the athlete just has no idea where to start. And so we see so many of these foundations that essentially are non-active or non-compliant status within 3 years of the end of their playing career. So as you're going through this process, talk a little bit about what the plans are, whether through the alliance or through consulting company, to really help those athletes create something that's sustainable and can leave a legacy on their behalf.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reinforce what you said, Roy, because running a nonprofit is just as monotonous as running a small business. And I've never met anybody who's run a nonprofit who ever got really excited about bookkeeping or budgeting or prepping for a board meeting. Like, those are the things that suck, but are so important to being a fiduciary and running a responsible organization. Everybody wants to make an impact, and that's great. So it's really important, as you point out, for everybody to appreciate everything that has to happen and be honest about what they want to do. So back to your question about how do we create a Walter Payton Alliance that's sustainable, building it from the ground up. I'm really excited that the people we're going to have to work with are the men of the year, and they have shown that they're committed to making a difference. Many of them have their own foundations. And so just convening them and giving them an opportunity to collaborate, I think will create some momentum that doesn't exist now and help us to sustain that. And in terms of the curriculum to help educate professional athletes, young athletes, that'll be like a 101 course, no different than the 101 course that they have to take about gambling and drugs and the press. It needs to be something that they're prepared for. I think that if we want our young professional athletes to use their platform and give back to the community, we need to prepare them for that. We need to show them the types of people we want them to be in society, and not just pepper them with courses and lectures about things we don't want them to do.
Well, Darren, I know you're doing amazing work. Followed what you did with Simon's Heart and saw firsthand how you built and grew the impact of that organization, and seen what you're doing now, and look forward to following the growth of the alliance and seeing how we can help collaborate as Sports Philanthropy Network, both with that alliance and with other initiatives. There's so much work to be done, and as you said, so many inefficiencies sort of in the industry and in the marketplace of how things are being done and how funds are being raised and allocated. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, and I admire you guys for being in this big room, trying to create a big tent for philanthropy in the world of sports. So kudos to you guys, and I hope you get some rest.
On behalf of Kayla Bradham, I'm Roy Kessel with Sports Philanthropy Network, thanking all of our viewers and listeners for joining us today, thanking Darren Sudman for taking the time in between his hectic schedule and joining us, and reminding everybody to live generously. Thank you.